her tribe buried up to her neck in the sand. Cherokee woman closed her eyes to die until...
Before we dive into the story, don't forget to like the video and tell us in the comments where you're watching from.
The heat was the first thing he noticed. Not the kind that just made a man sweat, but the kind that pressed down, thick and dry, until it turned air into something you had to chew before you could breathe. Jonas Creel sat on the wagon bench, one hand holding the reins loose, the other resting on his thigh. His shirt stuck to his back, damp at the spine, and every breath came slow. The desert around him stretched quiet and endless, flat red dirt broken by clusters of brittle brush, the odd scatter of rock, and far-off ridgelines that never seemed to get closer no matter how long you rode. His mule, Cora, moved slow but steady. Jonas didn't push her. There was no reason to. He wasn't on a tight schedule. Hadn't been in over 2 years. The Army depot north of Bitterwind could wait on their tin peaches and cheap rifles. He was hauling freight. Yes, but mostly he was just moving, keeping busy, keeping out of towns where people remembered his face and asked too many questions. The last time someone had asked about his wife, he nearly knocked a man through a saloon door. The time before that, someone asked if he still had his boy. He didn't. He came out this way because the main trail had washed out near Carrion Hollow. Rain back in the high country had taken out a bridge, so he'd gone around, cutting east toward the dry basins north of Red Washington. It was a longer path, but it kept him out of contact, and that suited him fine. He didn't like company. He didn't like noise. Most days, he just wanted the quiet. But then the wind shifted. It wasn't much, just a faint movement, enough to make the smell of something hit his nose. Not rot, not death, but something human. Jonas slowed the mule, leaned forward. His eyes scanned the horizon. Empty. Then, there, something low in the sand. A bump, a shape. He blinked. It didn't move. For a long second, he thought it might be some trick of the heat. Mirage. But the closer he got, the less it looked like rock and more like. Ahead, he dropped from the wagon fast. Boots hit sand. He left the reins hanging. When he got close enough, his stomach turned. A woman, buried up to the neck. Her face scorched. Eyes closed. Lips cracked. Flies buzzed near her cheeks, and he saw her chest barely move. She wasn't dead. Not yet. He stared down at her, not speaking, not moving. His hands went cold, despite the heat. He looked around. No horses. No people. No sign of any camp. Just her. Someone had left her here. He knelt slowly, pressed a hand near her neck, checking for a pulse. It was faint. Her skin burned hot. He shook his head, then pulled his canteen from his belt, opened the cap, and dribbled a few drops on her lips. They cracked open slightly. Her eyes fluttered. He saw her flinch, not a full movement, just a twitch. Enough to show she wasn't beyond feeling. He didn't say a word, just turned and started digging. The sand was packed tight. His fingers clawed it back in short, fast scrapes. His palms bled before long, but he didn't stop. Every few minutes, he paused to tip more water to her mouth, careful not to choke her. After an hour, he had most of her torso and arms free. She was light, bones a dry muscle. Her blouse, traditional, handmade, torn at the shoulder. A necklace of feathers hung loose across her chest. Once her hips were clear, he slid his arms underneath her and lifted. She didn't make a sound. Her eyes opened for just a moment, wide, unfocused. Then they closed again. Back at the wagon, he laid her across the canvas, tucked a blanket around her. He opened a second canteen and placed it near her lips again. She swallowed now, barely, but she did. He kept the wagon moving. As he drove, his thoughts twisted through the facts. She was Cherokee. He recognized enough of the beadwork and clothing to know that. But what the hell was she doing buried in the middle of nowhere? He'd heard of old punishments, desert justice, banishment for tribal offenses. But this was the kind of thing you only heard in whispered stories, not something a man expected to ride up on himself. He looked back at her once. She hadn't moved since he laid her down. He didn't stop until after sunset. Found a dry creek, lit a fire, laid her on a tarp nearby, took off his coat and folded it under her head, then sat down across from her and watched. Jonas didn't sleep that night. Every time her chest stopped moving for too long, he leaned in to check. Every time she whimpered, he whispered. Not words, just sound. Something to say he was there. His mind wandered. He remembered the winter his wife took sick. How the doctor came too late. How his boy didn't last another month after her. Jonas had gone him after that. Put the house up for sale. Walked away from the ranch. Bought the mule and wagon and didn't look back. Since then, he'd avoided other people. Didn't want their talk. Didn't want their sympathy. He couldn't fix anyone. Couldn't even fix himself. But here was this woman. Burned, half dead, dumped in the sand like she didn't matter. And she was still breathing. By morning, he lit the fire again. Boiled coffee. Fed her a few softened beans with a spoon. She gagged the first time. Got down the second. When she opened her eyes, really opened them, she didn't speak. Just stared at him. He nodded once. You're safe. No reply. Just a flicker of movement in her fingers, tightening around the blanket he'd laid across her. He didn't need her to speak. She needed time. So he poured a second tin of coffee, sat near the fire, and kept watch on the road. He didn't know who she was. Didn't know why she'd been left. Didn't care. He'd already decided he wasn't leaving her. The next morning came dry and gray. No clouds, just a pale sun and the kind of still air that made every sound carry. Jonas sat by the fire again, stirring a small pot of boiled oats with a steady hand. His eyes kept drifting to her. The Cherokee woman. Her body was still wrapped in his coat, face turned toward the fire, lips chapped and twitching slightly like her sleep wasn't clean. She hadn't said a word since he'd pulled her out of the dirt. 2 days now. She'd sipped water, chewed soft beans when he fed her, opened her eyes sometimes, but nothing more. Jonas didn't press. He knew what it was like to be too far inside your own head to talk. Still, he needed to know what he was dealing with. He crouched near her and spoke in a quiet voice, careful not to sound demanding. You got a name? No response. He sat back. Let it be. That evening, after moving the wagon another half-day north along the trail, they made camp again. He built a windbreak with canvas and crates. Spread the blanket wider so she could sit propped against a pack. She moved with more strength now, slow but aware. Her fingers gripped the wool when he handed it to her. When he handed her a tin cup of water, she took it on her own. Her hand shook, but she didn't spill. After she drank, she looked at him. Sonny, she said hoarsely. He blinked, caught off guard. She said it again. My name, Sonny. Her voice was rough from disuse, almost broken, but it was there, and it was clear. He gave a single nod. Jonas, he said. Creole. She looked at him for a few more seconds, then lowered her eyes. That was all, but it was enough. They camped near a dry arroyo that night. Jonas pulled out a spare shirt and gave it to her, turning his back so she could change. When she emerged from the wagon, she was still weak, still limping, but upright. She wrapped herself in the blanket and sat across from him near the fire. He didn't ask questions, but in his head, the pieces didn't sit right. A woman like her, out here alone, half dead, buried to her neck in the sand. That wasn't something that happened by accident. That was deliberate. And the marks on her body, bruises fading at the shoulder, raw skin near her collarbone. Someone had hurt her before they buried her. Maybe more than one someone. He stirred the fire with a stick. Who did that to you? He asked finally. Sonny didn't answer right away. She stared into the flames, the light flickering against her sharp cheekbones and sun-dried skin. Her voice came low. My mother's husband. The others listened to him. Jonas didn't speak. He said I defied tradition, that I spoke up when I shouldn't have. A girl, young, was beaten. I said it was wrong. I didn't shout. I didn't fight. Just said it. She paused. Her jaw clenched. That was enough. Jonas leaned forward, elbows on his knees. And your mother? Sonny's expression didn't change, but her voice thinned. She didn't say anything, just stood there. That told him more than he needed. She looked up, eyes hard despite the rawness in her throat. He said it was old law, that if a woman causes disorder, she can be buried. He said I was a threat to unity. Jonas nodded once, slowly. He'd heard of such things. Not often, not in these times. But it wasn't unheard of in fractured camps where old beliefs lived longer than reason. When tribal groups splintered and survival overtook judgment, Sometimes the wrong men ended up in charge. And justice turned ugly. "Do they know you're alive?" he asked. She shook her head. "Do you want them to?" She didn't speak for a long time. "No," she said finally. That night, she slept inside the wagon under canvas, not just from cold, but for safety. Jonas slept outside by the fire. His rifle lay across his lap, cocked and ready. He didn't trust what kind of men left a woman buried in the desert. He didn't know if they'd come looking, but he wasn't taking chances. The next morning, she surprised him by walking out of the wagon before sunrise, blanket wrapped around her shoulders. She moved stiffly, but she moved. She knelt beside him by the coals and helped stir the embers. They sat that way for a while, not talking, just sharing the morning. Jonas finally spoke. "You got anywhere you want to go?" Sonny shook her head. "No family left. Tribe's broken. They wouldn't have me even if I did. You got any enemies out there who might come after you?" "Only the ones that buried me." He gave a short breath through his nose. "That narrows it down." Sonny looked at him, then really looked. Her eyes weren't begging. They weren't soft. They were worn, aware, and steady. She didn't ask him for anything. Not a ride, not protection. But there was something there, a question beneath the silence. Jonas saw it. He thought about the road ahead, the weeks of hauling freight north, the depot, then another route, more travel. The same circuit he'd been running for the past year and a half just to stay moving. And he thought about her, half dead in the sand 2 days ago, now sitting upright and alive because he hadn't ridden past. He made the decision then. "I got a route to Bitterwind. Army Depot. Pays decent. Takes a few days. I got a cabin near the pass, nothing fancy. But you're welcome to ride as far as you want." Sonny didn't answer, but she didn't say no. When he loaded the wagon that morning, she climbed in slow and settled herself on the blankets without needing help. Jonas took up the reins. They headed north. The wind picked up behind them, but they didn't look back. They traveled north for 2 days in silence, through hard-baked earth and windswept flats where only thorn brush grew. The wagon moved slow. Jonas didn't push the mule. There was no hurry. Sonny spent most of the time lying down in the back, wrapped in a wool blanket with her eyes half open, watching the sky pass above her. She hadn't asked where they were going, and Jonas hadn't said. Midway through the second day, they passed the burnt ruins of a telegraph station. Half the roof had collapsed, timbers blackened, the old sign barely hanging on by a rusted nail. Jonas slowed the wagon. Sonny sat up slightly, looking toward it. There was no smoke, no tracks, no fresh signs of anyone nearby. Just another forgotten outpost the world had moved on from. Jonas spoke for the first time in hours. Raiders hit it 2 years back. Used to be Army ran. Then came disease. Then the looters. Sonny looked toward him. "You've seen a lot." He nodded. "Enough." That night, they camped in a low draw near a patch of mesquite trees. Jonas tied the mule to a stake, unpacked supplies, and built a fire from dried scrub. Sonny sat near him, upright now, quiet but steady. Her voice was stronger. Her lips had healed some. When he handed her the tin of beans, she took it with a quiet "thank you." It was the first time she'd thanked him. Jonas didn't reply. He just watched the fire and ate in silence. After they finished, Sonny spoke. "You asked before if I had people left." He nodded. "My father died when I was young. Cavalry rode through. They called it a mistake. Wrong encampment. He was the only one shot." He was sitting down. Jonas didn't flinch. He knew stories like that. Too many. Stories nobody wrote down. After that, my mother remarried. Her new husband, he wasn't like my father. He was the kind of man who talked loud and hit harder. Said we had to protect what was left of our bloodline. Said pain made people loyal. Sonny looked into the fire, her eyes steady but not cold. "I kept quiet for years. But when he beat that girl, just a child, for walking alone near the edge of camp, I said something. Just said it wasn't right. I didn't even raise my voice." She paused. He saw it as challenge. Said I was dangerous, that I questioned his authority. And once he said it out loud, the others fell in line. Jonas set down his tin. "No one defended you." She shook her head. "Even my mother wouldn't look at me. I think she was scared he'd do the same to her." Jonas watched her closely. She didn't cry. Her voice never cracked. But there was something in the way she spoke, flat, controlled, like she'd gone through it all 1,000 times already in her mind. They buried me at dawn. Said if I was innocent, the land would forgive me. She let out a breath, more like an exhale than a sigh. I didn't think anyone would find me. Jonas sat back, looking into the coals. I didn't expect to find anyone. She looked at him. Why did you stop? He didn't answer right away. Didn't feel right to ride past, he said. Figured if I did, I'd see your face in every dust storm the rest of my life. Sonny looked at him a long moment, then gave the smallest nod. The wind shifted. Jonas added more wood to the fire. After a pause, she asked, "Why do you travel alone?" Jonas stared into the flames, his hands resting over his knees. His jaw tightened. Wife passed. Typhoid. Son got sick a month later. Lost him too. Sonny lowered her gaze. I'm sorry. He didn't respond. Just looked at the fire until the flames dropped low. Later that night, while Jonas rolled out his bedroll and checked his rifle, Sonny climbed back into the wagon. She sat with her back against a grain sack, watching the stars overhead. She didn't know where they were headed exactly, but she knew this much. She wasn't going back. That part of her life had ended. In the morning, Jonas gave her a clean rag and a tin basin of water. She wiped her face, washed her hands, cleaned her arms. He didn't watch her, just kept busy with packing the wagon. But something shifted that day. They rode a little closer together, sat nearer at the fire. And when she handed him his coat that night, after the wind picked up, he took it without a word, but held her eyes for a moment longer than he had before. Neither of them said it out loud, but the road had changed. She was no longer cargo, no longer a stranger, and he was no longer just the man who dug her out of the sand. She was staying, at least for now, and he was letting her. The cabin came into view late afternoon on the fourth day. Set low in a gully between two dry hills, it was barely more than a structure. Pine walls silvered by sun, a tin roof patched in places with tar and canvas, a lean-to shed out back, and a split rail pen for a mule. But to Sonny, it looked like something solid. Shelter. Stillness. Jonas pulled the wagon up beside the post rail and stepped down without a word. He checked the mule, unbuckled the harness, and walked it to water while Sonny stayed seated in the wagon bed, taking in her first full view of where he lived. It didn't look like much, but everything was functional, neat, arranged with care. A pile of chopped wood stacked precisely by the door. A barrel under the corner of the roof for catching rainwater. No curtains in the window, just clean oil paper stretched over the frame. She noticed something else too. No signs of anyone else. No second boots by the door. No toys. No woman's shawl left hanging. This was a place meant for one. When Jonas came back around, she stepped down carefully from the wagon. Her legs were steadier now, though her steps still carried the memory of weakness. He didn't offer a hand. Didn't need to. She liked that about him. He moved past her and pushed the cabin door open. You can take the bed, he said simply. She looked past him. Inside, it was sparse. One cot with a wool blanket, a table, 2 chairs, a shelf with dried goods, and a stove made from an old barrel. A rifle hung on 2 nails above the door. On the far wall, a small frame drawing of a child. Pencil sketched. Carefully done. A boy. Sonny stepped inside, slowly. The air smelled of smoke, iron, and cedar. She turned back to look at him. Where will you sleep? I'll build a second cot, he said. I got lumber in the shed. She didn't answer, just nodded and set the blanket from the wagon down at the foot of the bed. They worked together that evening without speaking much. She swept the floor. He cleaned out the stove. When he laid the first boards for a second cot near the opposite wall, she brought nails without being asked. After supper, beans, cornbread, and a bit of dried meat, they sat outside for a while, watching the light fade down the hill. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was something else now, like a common ground. The kind that forms not from talking, but surviving. Jonas took a sip from his tin cup. You planning on moving on eventually? Sonny kept her eyes on the darkening ridgeline. I haven't thought that far. Right now, just feels like, I don't know, like I'm allowed to breathe here. He didn't reply, just nodded and drank again. She looked over at him. Do you ever get tired of being alone? He didn't look back at her, but his jaw tightened. Used to think I needed to be. But not now. He hesitated, still figuring that part out. A few moments passed. Crickets started up in the brush. "Who drew the picture?" she asked. Jonas was quiet for a while. "My boy," he said. "Name was Eli. I drew that the winter after he passed. Couldn't bury him proper. Ground was too hard." Sonny's voice softened. "I'm sorry." He shook his head. "Don't be. You didn't do it." They didn't speak after that. He stood and took the cups inside. She followed him in, folded the blankets, and sat on the edge of the cot he'd given her. Later, in the dark, after the fire burned low and the wind pressed against the seams of the cabin, Sonny lay awake. She stared at the roof, hands folded over her stomach. She could hear Jonas's breathing, slow, steady, from the other side of the room. She thought about the pit, about her mother, about the silence that followed her own voice when she stood up for that girl. She wondered if the girl was still alive. She'd never know. But here, now, was a man who had no reason to take her in, who hadn't asked her for anything, not even thanks. She thought of the way he looked at her when she spoke, like he was listening, not judging. She turned on her side and closed her eyes. The next morning, she woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of sawing. Jonas was outside, working on a new fence post. She rose slowly, found her shoes, and stepped outside to join him. He didn't look up, just said, "There's coffee on the stove. You can help if you want." She picked up the other end of the beam without saying a word. The day had begun, and she had no plans to leave. By the third week, Sonny had taken to the rhythm of the place like she'd always known it. Mornings began with coffee, black, hot, nothing fancy. Jonas always brewed it early, before the sun fully crested the ridge, while the air still held a bite. She'd wake to the scent, pull on the thick flannel overshirt he'd given her, and step outside without a word. He was always there, splitting wood, checking the mule, patching harnesses, or sharpening tools by lantern light. She never asked what needed doing. She just joined in. At first, she stayed quiet because she was still recovering, physically, emotionally, but now, silence had simply become how they lived. They spoke when something had to be said. Everything else could be understood through motion. He passed her the hammer. She brought the nails. He scrubbed the wash basin. She boiled water to rinse. Every gesture was part of a pattern forming between them. Unspoken, necessary, and stable. One afternoon, a male rider came up the trail. A kid from a depot, maybe 20. Nervous, jumpy, thin. He brought a few folded papers, military orders, and a sealed envelope for Jonas from the supply office. Sonny stayed inside while the man dismounted, but she watched from the small window. Jonas took the papers, said almost nothing. The rider glanced toward the cabin. "You got someone in there?" Jonas's reply came low. "She's with me." The boy didn't press. He left quick. That night, Sonny asked about it. What was in the envelope? Jonas was sitting at the table, reading the note in the lamplight. New freight assignment. They wanted to haul barrels down to Granite Hill. Late winter run. "You going?" "Probably." She nodded. "Do they know you live out here?" "They don't ask." "Do they care you've got someone with you now?" He looked up from a paper. "No." She stared at him. "Do you?" His answer didn't come fast, but when it did, it was steady. "No." That settled it. The next day, Sonny was out near the back shed, sweeping dust from the low wooden platform that passed as a porch, when she found a pair of worn leather boots. Smaller than Jonas's. Child size. Carefully wrapped in oiled cloth and tucked under a bench. She didn't move them, just stared for a moment, then quietly covered them back up. That night, she made the cornbread. It came out burnt on the bottom, but warm through. Jonas ate every bite without complaint. After the plates were cleared, she spoke across the table. "The boots outside the shed. Your son's." He nodded once, eyes fixed on the lamp flame. "I didn't move them," she said. "I know." She looked down at her hands. "I lost someone too. Years ago. My father. He was the only person who spoke up for me. After he died, the camp changed. Got harder. Meaner. People stopped being people. They started watching each other more than helping." Jonas didn't speak. He just listened, like always. If I'd had someone like him standing behind me when they accused me, it wouldn't have happened. Jonas finally said, "That man back then, your mother's husband, he's still alive?" She looked up. "Yes." "You think he'll come looking?" She shook her head. No. If he believed I survived, he'd have sent someone already. He thinks I'm gone. Dead like he wanted. Jonas leaned back in his chair. Then he's a fool. They said nothing else that night. But the next morning, Jonas brought out his rifle, oiled and cleaned it, then handed it to her. You know how to shoot? Sonny stared at it. Some. He pointed toward a stack of chipped cans he'd set on a fence post. Show me. She hesitated, then took the rifle. Stepped back. Aimed. Fired. First shot missed. Second hit. He didn't smile, didn't praise her. Just said, we'll keep practicing. Every afternoon after that, they spent time near the fence line, shooting together. The sound echoed out across the valley. Each shot felt like a piece of something old cracking loose inside her. By the end of the week, she was hitting almost every time. One evening, after the last shot rang out and the sun dipped behind the ridge, she handed the rifle back to him. Their fingers brushed. Neither of them pulled away. Jonas didn't speak. He set the rifle down, slow and quiet, then turned toward her. Sonny didn't step back. Her breath was steady. She reached up, touched the edge of his coat near his chest. It wasn't a grand gesture, just a small moment, a choice to stay close. He looked down at her, waiting. She spoke barely above a whisper. I'm not going anywhere. He nodded once. I know. The first snow came sooner than expected. A thin dusting at first, just enough to powder the dirt and whisper against the roof in the early morning. But by nightfall, it had deepened. Jonas chopped more wood while Sonny laid towels along the window cracks and stoked the stove twice instead of once. The desert didn't see snow often, but up here near the pass, winter had its own rules. Inside the cabin, heat held close. The kettle steamed. A low orange glow flickered across the walls. Sonny moved slower now, her steps cautious on the cold floor, but not from weakness. Something had shifted. Not in her body. She'd healed, but in the weight of their days. The silence between them had taken on new shape. Familiar. Intimate. It wasn't just quiet anymore. It was presence. Jonas sat at the table, boots off, wool socks stretched toward the stove. He was cleaning his knife, a habit he did without thought, blade glinting under the lamplight. Sonny sat across from him, working thread through a torn shirt of his that had caught on barbed wire 2 days back. She was good with a needle. Careful, precise. She didn't rush anything. She finished the last stitch, tied it off, then looked up. It's done. He nodded. You didn't have to. I know. But you've got few enough shirts as it is. That earned the smallest smile. He folded the knife closed and set it down. For a long while they just sat, the only sound the kettle rattling gently and the wind against the eaves. Then, finally Sonny spoke. There's something I've been thinking about. Jonas looked at her, waiting. If anyone from the depot ever comes asking questions about me, what would you say? He was quiet for a beat. Nobody asks questions unless they've got reason. But if they do, he met her eyes. I'd say you're my wife. The air between them changed. Sonny didn't blink. You mean that? I wouldn't say it if I didn't. Her voice dropped to a whisper. You don't even know everything about me. I know enough. She leaned forward slightly. You don't know that I used to want a family. That before all this, before I spoke up, before I got buried, I thought I might have a child one day. A home. Jonas's face didn't change, but something in his eyes tightened. He set his hands flat on the table. I wanted that too. I had it once, and I lost it. Doesn't mean I stopped wanting. Sonny stared at him a long moment. You still think about them? Every day. She nodded slowly. I never got to have that. Not even once. He didn't offer comfort. Didn't soften the truth. He just looked at her and said, You still can. She looked away, blinking. Then, after a moment, stood and moved around the table. She stopped beside him. He looked up. Her hand reached for his, hesitant at first, then firm. She gripped it tight. I'm not scared of being close to you, she said. But I don't want to be something you take in just to fill a hole. Jonas stood slowly. They were nearly the same height. He rested his hand gently against the side of her neck, his thumb brushing beneath her jaw. You're not, he said. You're here because you stayed. And because I wanted you to. She didn't speak, just nodded. Her face close now, breath shallow. Then she leaned in. He met her halfway. The kiss wasn't rushed. It wasn't fiery or loud. It was firm, grounded. Two people who had nothing left to pretend about. His hand stayed on her shoulders. Hers slipped beneath his coat. When they parted, she didn't pull away. She rested her forehead against his chest and stood there a long time. That night, they didn't sleep in separate corners. Jonas cleared the second cot to make room. The cabin was quiet. The stove burned low. The world outside was snow and silence. Inside, their bodies met slowly. No need for urgency, no fear. His hands were calloused and warm. Hers held steady. She didn't flinch when he undressed her. He didn't speak when she touched the scar across his ribs. There was nothing to explain. They knew who they were now. Later, lying beside him in the warmth of the shared blanket, she whispered, "I used to think I was broken." Jonas turned to her. "You're not." She blinked back the heat behind her eyes. "You don't even flinch when I talk about what they did. I flinch when I imagine leaving you there." She stared at the ceiling. "Do you really want me here for good?" "I already do." He meant it. Every word. Sonny turned to her side, curled into him, and for the first time in years, she slept through the night. No waking, no terror, just stillness. The snow kept falling. The wind picked up. But inside that small cabin, something strong had taken root, and neither of them had plans to walk away. The snow held for days. Jonas and Sonny kept close to the stove, rising early to stoke the coals and boil water for coffee. They rationed supplies carefully. There was enough salt pork, beans, flour, and dried apples to last a few more weeks if they kept portions small. Outside, drifts had piled against the west wall of the cabin, burying the woodpile halfway. Jonas had to dig his way to it each morning, boots crunching through the crust. Inside, the routine held steady. Sonny swept the floor, mended the cuffs of his shirt, stirred the pot while he patched wagon straps or carved spare handles for tools. The physical nearness between them came easier now, his hand on her lower back as he passed behind her, her fingers grazing his when handing him a tin cup. No hesitation, no question. Still, neither of them spoke in grand terms. No declarations. No talk of love, no promises. That wasn't how they worked. But it was clear in how they move around each other, how they watched the windows, how they lay close under one blanket at night. That what had formed between them wasn't passing. On the fourth day of snow, Sonny stepped outside alone for air. The sky was colorless, light bleeding through clouds with no sun behind it. The cold bit hard at her face, but she welcomed it. It reminded her she was alive. Not buried, not hunted. She stood quietly by the edge of the rise, wrapped in his coat, watching the valley below. Then she heard it. Hooves. Far off, steady. She turned back toward the cabin. "Jonas," she called, voice low but urgent. He was outside in seconds, rifle already in hand, eyes scanning the ridge. Two riders were coming down from the south. Not fast, not slow. Just enough pace to cover ground without tiring the horses. Both wore long coats. One had a wide-brimmed hat turned low. From this distance, their faces weren't visible. Jonas stepped forward, rifle against his shoulder. "Stay back," he said. Sonny didn't argue. She moved beside the doorway, but didn't go in. The riders came closer. When they were within 50 yards, the man in front raised a hand and slowed his horse. The second stayed a few paces behind. Jonas didn't lower the rifle. "Looking for a freight hauler," the first man called out. "Jonas Creel." Jonas didn't answer yet. "I got Army orders to confirm your winter route," the man continued. "They didn't hear from you. They want the barrels moved south before the freeze deepens." "Send a letter next time," Jonas said flatly. "I didn't ask for a visit. We figured something happened." That storm hit hard. Jonas lowered the rifle slowly, but didn't step forward. "Well, I'm here." The man nodded. "We'll be turning back tomorrow. Depot wants confirmation of delivery by week's end." Jonas didn't say yes or no. After a moment, the man tipped his hat. Didn't mean to startle anyone. As they turned and rode off, Sonny stepped out fully. "They know where you live now. They've always known. They just didn't care until now." She looked toward the trail where the men had gone. "If someone else comes next time, someone asking about me?" Jonas looked at her. "Then I'll lie." That night, she lay beside him, arms folded beneath her chin, staring into the low glow of the stove. I still feel them sometimes, she said. Their eyes on me. That silence. That feeling of being watched. Jonas turned to her. They're not coming. You don't know that. I know they buried you and didn't look back. That means they don't expect to see you again. And if one of them ever does, they'll answer to me. Sonny didn't respond right away. Then quietly she said, I want a child. Jonas was silent for a long moment. Then now, not now, but I want to know if I can. He turned onto his back, one arm behind his head. You think they? I don't know. I've always wondered if something was broken in me. No blood since that winter 3 years ago. I thought it might never come back. Has it? Yes. 2 months ago. Quiet but real. Jonas nodded. Then you're not broken. She looked over at him. Would it matter to you if I couldn't? No, but you'd want it. I would. Her voice dropped. Even after losing one, he turned toward her, his voice low. Especially after. In the morning, the snow had stopped. The air was still. Sunlight came sharp through the window. The storm had passed. Sonny stood at the stove, barefoot, warming her hands. Jonas came up behind her, wrapped his arms around her waist, and held her there. They didn't say anything. They didn't have to. The snow melted slow, revealing the broken earth beneath. Mud tracked easily now, through the yard, along the porch, across the floorboards inside the cabin. Sonny kept a mop by the door and wiped it down twice daily. Jonas tried not to bring it in, but his boots were soaked no matter how careful he stepped. Winter was easing off, but not without leaving its mark. They'd been living together nearly 2 full months. Each day had a rhythm now. Jonas would ride to the nearby way station for supplies or news. Sonny stayed behind, tending the place, boiling water, cleaning out the shed, sorting goods for the coming spring. She moved like she belonged because she did. There were no more hesitations, no awkward silences. The space between them had settled. Their bond had roots now. One afternoon, Jonas returned with a sack of feed and a folded letter. He set the sack on the porch, knocked the mud from his boots, and came inside. Sonny was kneeling by the stove, folding a cloth. He handed her the letter without saying anything. She held it in her hands a second longer than needed before opening it. The handwriting wasn't familiar. The letter came from a woman in the southern tribal basin, someone Sonny had once known. Not a friend, but not an enemy either. A woman named OHI. The letter was short, stiffly worded, and to the point. Your mother died last moon. The man who condemned you lost his position. He's gone north. No one speaks your name now. The camp has changed. Sonny read it twice. Her eyes moved slowly, but her expression didn't shift. She folded the letter, set on the table, and walked out onto the porch. Jonas didn't follow right away. He knew the look in her eyes. Wade did join her. She was sitting on the top step, arms wrapped around her knees. The wind stirred loose strands of her hair. He sat beside her. They've buried her in a dry grave, Sonny said quietly. No ceremony, just dirt. Jonas nodded. She didn't stand up for me. Not once. But I can't stop thinking about her hands. How they used to tie my hair. You don't owe her anything. I know. They sat in silence, staring out at the half-thawed field, snow giving way to stubborn grass. She let it happen, Sonny said. Let them do it. Let him order it. And she didn't even come to see if I was dead. Jonas looked at her. But you're not. No, she said. I'm not. That night, Sonny lit the stove herself, cooked stew without help, and set the table for 2. They ate quietly. When Jonas tried to clear his bowl, she stopped him with a hand to his wrist. I want to marry you, she said plainly. Jonas blinked. He set the bowl down. Sonny held his gaze. Not because I owe you. Not because I'm grateful. Because I want this. All of it. The quiet, the work, the way we move around each other. I want a permanent. He stared at her for a long second. Then it is, I want the words, she said, even if no one's here to hear them. Jonas stood slowly, walked around the table, took both her hands in his. He looked her in the eye and spoke with the same steady voice he used for everything that mattered. Then I take you. I'm my wife. From this day forward. Sonny's throat tightened. I take you too. And I'm not leaving. He kissed her, gentle without force but full. Later in bed, she whispered, I think I might be pregnant. Jonas turned to her. You sure? Not yet, but I feel different. My body feels full. Not like before. He nodded slowly. We'll wait and see. Her hand rested over her belly. If I am, I'm not afraid. You don't have to be. That night, the wind softened. The walls creaked less. The stove held steady heat. Inside, the house no longer felt like just his or just hers. It was theirs now. All of it. Spring came in slowly, hesitant, uncertain. The snow was gone by the end of March, but the air stayed cold in the mornings. The earth turned soft underfoot, and the first green shoots pushed through around the fence line. Jonas patched the roof before the next rain, and Sonny worked the soil near the cabin, marking out a plot for beans, onions, and whatever herbs would grow in rough land. There was no ceremony, no preacher, no witness. But one morning, Jonas slid a thin iron ring across the table while she was kneading dough. She didn't say anything right away, just stared at it, then at him. He didn't explain. She wiped her hands, slid it on, and kept working. That afternoon, they rode to the supply depot together. She didn't stay in the wagon. She walked beside him, coat buttoned tight, her chin held firm. A few heads turned, but no one said a word. Jonas introduced her as his wife when asked. He did it casually, like it was always the truth. Nobody questioned it. That night, in the cabin, Sonny sat at the table running her fingers over the rough edge of the ring. It doesn't shine, she said. It's made to last, Jonas answered. She nodded. That's better. The pregnancy became more certain as the weeks passed. Her body changed just a little at first. A heaviness in her belly, a tiredness in the evenings that she didn't fight. Jonas noticed before she said anything. The way she held her back after long work. How her appetite shifted. How she paused longer at the edge of the field. One morning she confirmed it. Simply, it's happening. Jonas just nodded and stepped toward her. She let him hold her a long time. I don't need much, she whispered. Just quiet. And you'll have both. No one came from the tribe. No letters. No men on horseback. Whoever had once wanted her dead had moved on. The man who condemned her had vanished north, as OHI's letter said. The camp never sent word again. Her past didn't follow her anymore. Sometimes she still woke in the early hours, hand over her stomach, listening for the sound of her own breath, making sure it was still hers, that she wasn't back in the sand. But every time, there was Jonas, a shape in the dark beside her, his breathing low, his presence heavy and warm. She'd watch him sleep, sometimes, not out of worry, just to remind herself he was real. By May, the garden had sprouted and the fence line was mended. Jonas built a cradle from leftover pine. It wasn't perfect. One leg sat slightly uneven, but he sanded the wood smooth and oiled it with care. Sonny didn't comment on the wobble. She lined it with soft fabric and placed it near the window where the morning light came in. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the light fade, she leaned her head against his shoulder. If it's a boy, she said, I want to name him Eli. Jonas didn't speak at first. Then he whispered, all right. And if it's a girl, you choose. She nodded. Then I will. Jonas looked out toward the hills, where the sky was turning gold behind the low ridges. I used to think the world didn't have space for this, he said. Not after what I lost. And now. He looked down at her. Now I know better. Inside the house, the fire burned low. A cradle sat waiting. 2 cups sat on the table, and clothes hung to dry on a line strung by the window. Outside, the wind picked up, but it wasn't bitter anymore. It just moved the grass. Sonny closed her eyes, her hand resting gently over her belly, and said the words he'd been carrying in silence since the moment he dug her from the sand. I'm home, and this time she meant it.